The combination of myrrh and cannabis is something quite extraordinary.
This is our humble hemp patch.
5,000 years of medical cannabis use.
We're learning about other cannabinoids.
Marijuana is grown in every state in the Union.
I'm Lex Pelger, Director of Education at CV Sciences, and this is the Lex Files. The Reverend Danny Nemu examines the Gospels and psychedelic drugs. He joins those researchers who see an entheogenic origin to some of the biblical stories and Judeo-Christian practices. In this conversation, we learn the true purpose of frankincense and myrrh, the fungal essence of our daily bread, and some of the good Reverend's favorite legal highs. As you'll hear, his second book, Neuro-Apocalypse, is out, and I highly recommend it. So please enjoy this talk with the Reverend Danny Nemu. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Lex. It's good to be here.
I'm excited to hear more about your writings on the Bible and drugs. But I think the first question is, how do you come by the Reverend title?
I got ordained on the internet for about $15, and we're going back a long way now. This was last millennium, so it's probably a little bit more than that now. But when I lived in Japan, I got myself a job marrying, let's say, marrying pagans, basically. And as everybody knows, Jesus was a white man, and therefore I managed to land this job in a rather bizarre industry in Japan. So I would go along. Sometimes I'd do 5 weddings in a day. I would sing "What a Friend You Have in Jesus" in Japanese, and they would be stained glass windows and all of that kind of malarkey. So in order to do that, I needed to be a genuine reverend, which meant I needed to send $15 off to the Universal Life Church.
That's great. I'm glad it's official and that it worked out so well.
Yes, my son.
And I'd actually like to start with the beginning of your story, both with drugs and with religion. And I was curious how both of those came into your early life.
Well, I was raised fairly secular, let's say. I was raised Reformed Jewish, which doesn't have a great deal of mysticism to it, certainly not the way I was taught it. And I was always interested. Yeah, I got into fiddling with my brain from quite a young age. I think around 15 was my first joint. And that was just fascinating. But I was, what else? I got into chaos magic at about the age of 20, about the same time as I got into Buddhism, almost exactly the same time. And that took me down some interesting pathways. But one of the foundational ideas of chaos magic is that nothing is true, everything is permitted. And I guess even before I got into that, I was curious about why people believed certain things and didn't believe other things. So I kind of read all Richard Dawkins's stuff on memes, for example. And yeah, I'm fascinated by why the mind does what it does in all dimensions. You know, why we see certain things, why we miss other things, why we think certain things, why we disbelieve other things. And so I guess my interest in religion was more as maybe let's say an anthropological interest. For quite a while, I did my dissertation at university was on Jehovah's Witnesses and 17th century American Protestants and their perspectives on health and the body. So I was always interested in what people believe and how that influences how they behave and how it influences history as well.
My people. Yeah. My church felt like it was 17th century Protestant.
Oh, right. I see.
And so that kind of interest made psychedelics a pretty natural discovery for you?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm just trying to think what was first. No, I think probably the psychedelics first. I think once I realized just how malleable certainly our perception of the world is, maybe the world itself, it just got me really fascinated about, what we believe and how what you believe affects what happens, both in terms of like for example in chaos magic, you have this idea that if you believe something with enough fervor, then things arise within that belief system, let's say. Kind of a similar track to what Robert Anton Wilson was on when he was talking about reality tunnels and switching between them.
And can you explain a little bit more about chaos magic to people who might be new to it, and where it comes from, how you discovered it?
Yeah, I think it's originally English. I wouldn't be surprised if it is. It's a kind of punk approach to magic, or at least my friend Julian Vane talks about it as a magpie's approach, picking up shiny things and then kind of stealing things from different traditions and putting them together into different configurations. So it's a system of occultism, let's say, where rather than you would believe in perhaps a particular Hindu deity for the purposes of a ritual, well, then having done your ritual, you would then put your beliefs back onto chaos, or onto you would then free yourself from those beliefs. So the idea is certain beliefs will get you certain results. So if you're casting a spell, for example, you might cast it from within a kind of Goetia Solomonic magic system, or you might go full on kind of evangelical Christian, or you can kind of do whatever you like. I guess what holds it together is beauty and coherence. Yeah. So think punk. Think kind of punk goth magicians with a kind of screw you attitude to any kind of belief. So, for example, they don't have subordinates. They have insubordinates in the IoT, which is one of the magical orders there. The idea being that the person beneath you, so traditionally you'd have someone training underneath you. The idea of the insubordinate is that they will raise questions and kind of criticize your own belief system.
Oh wow! So a lot of pushback. So it's one that lends itself to psychoactives.
Yeah, I think so. I also think that psychoactives can be quite, let's say psychedelics can be quite problematic in some ways. You get quite a lot of people, for example, going off to the Amazon, drinking ayahuasca 6 times and then coming home with some very clear beliefs about what they are, and that they're now doing shamanism or something like that. A friend of mine was recently doing a survey of kind of ayahuasca users in England. He was asking people about brujeria, asking them about witchcraft, and pretty much everyone in England didn't have any, just thought that was kind of a nonsense thing to believe. The idea of witchcraft. If you go into any traditional ayahuasquero culture, they know all about witchcraft. So I think you need to be quite careful with that kind of chaos approach. You need to be quite careful if you're taking something you like and leaving behind something you don't like. That can be quite unskillful as well if it's not done with a good amount of honesty and understanding of why you might not like something. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So yeah, when people take psychedelics, they can often have the edges get permeable and the ego kind of dissolves, and then when it comes back, it can kind of come back with a vengeance, and it seems to expand often with people. So this is why I say the person coming back from the jungle reckon he is a shaman after 6 sessions. Yeah, so I think it's quite important that well, not just occultists, just that anyone holds their beliefs lightly or wears their beliefs lightly.
One thing you've written about and spoken about a good bit is warnings against this ayahuasca light phenomenon kind of unfolding across the West. And I was wondering what advice you would have for people who want to try to maximize the benefit and minimize the harm while taking ayahuasca.
Yeah, I think the fact that ayahuasca has hit the West in a big way, I think that's a good thing. I'm not overly curmudgeonly about that. I just want to, what advice would I give? Firstly, I think it's really important that you meet the person, if at all possible, you meet the person before you're doing the session with them, because you're going to be putting your soul in their hands for the evening. And imagine you had a newborn baby or something like that. Would you be prepared to let this person look after your newborn baby for the evening? I think that's kind of the first thing, do you intrinsically trust this person? Also, are you sufficiently, do you have enough discernment to actually trust, you might be a person who trusts anyone, you know. So it's not necessarily the fact that you trust them that will make it a kosher thing to do. But that'd be like a very very minimum thing. Do you trust this person? Is the person that you're drinking with, are they prepared to take questions? Are they going to get offended by a question? You know what I mean? It's quite important to, again, I would test someone for the degree of their self-righteousness, that kind of thing. If you get a whiff of arrogance off the guy who's going to be providing you with ayahuasca, I would say think twice about it, or the woman.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I was curious about how your journey began with ayahuasca and how that went.
So I was living in Japan. This is going back 18 years ago now. So just at the beginning of the millennium. And I was with a woman there who, she didn't speak a great deal of English, and I didn't speak a great deal of Japanese at that particular point. And she asked me if I wanted to come to a crazy drugs party. And I said, well, yes, of course I do. And she didn't really explain it much more than that. And I was sold anyway. So off I went, and was quite shocked, really, to discover a room full of Japanese people, the men on one side, the women on the other side, the men wearing kind of slacks and white shirts, and the women wearing skirts, and the cross and the scent of incense and all kinds of Catholic business going on. And I made a beeline to the only other white man in the room and asked him, I said, is this some kind of a church? And he said, yeah, it's a funky church. And so then I was kind of there. What happens in Daime is it begins with a prayer. And so I kind of listened to these strange Japanese people praying Christian prayers in Portuguese, listening with some contempt, I will add. I was quite a belligerent, I don't know if I was an atheist, but I think I was just quite belligerent at the time in the way I thought, and I was Buddhist as well. At least I was practicing Buddhism. So I listened to that, and then I drank a dose, and then eventually all the walls kind of melted, and I found myself, ayahuasca is very strong. The system of Daime is a very strong ritual. Right? The ritual form is very much central. But people get a little bit confused about Daime because it's called a religion. It's called one of the ayahuasca religions. The progenitor, the founder of Daime, whose name is Mestre Ireneo, when he was asked, he said that that Daimists should call themselves Catholics. Right? So he didn't see it as a religion itself. He saw it as a practice that took place within the confines of Catholicism. And we're talking about folk Catholicism here. So this is Catholicism a long way away from the Vatican and kind of deep in the Amazon rainforest. So it's not quite what you might imagine. Less or more imperial Catholicism might be. So the ritual is really is done ideally, and in Brazil done in a very tight way. So you know exactly where you're meant to be. There's a place that you stand. You stand. The person on your right is taller than you, and the person on your left is shorter than you. And you stand in your lines and do a certain kind of 3-step all day or all night, and they do it in Brazil. And your next move is very much decided, i.e. you sing the next line, and then after you get to the end of the song, you sing the next song, and when you get to the end of all the songs, you do a prayer. So in one way, it's very constricting. In another way, it's very liberating because you don't have to think about what you're doing next. You can allow your journey to go, and you can follow it wherever it takes you. But I guess what I wanted to say is, in terms of beliefs, like Mestre Ireneo, he removed the creed from the Catholic litany. So in most Catholic ceremonies, you will have to say something along the lines of, I believe in God the Father, I believe in the communion of saints, I believe in the resurrection in the flesh. And Mestre Ireneo, when he created his own lineage, he took that out, which is quite significant. The idea you don't actually have to believe in anything. And if you ask the guy running a session or the woman running a session, the answer to a spiritual question, the answer you will probably get is you'll probably get pointed to the Daime. Basically, you'll probably get pointed to the brew. So it's not a received tradition in the way that we don't have priests who explain what stuff means. We have a brew, which is our means of understanding, and different things within that ritual. There are certain things there, but the actual meaning of them, what does the Virgin Mary, what does that mean? That's something outside of the doctrine, as in it's not something that's explained anywhere in the teachings. You get kind of inklings of it, but we don't have any dogmas, which is really good for me.
Yeah, because you're particularly against the Apostles' Creed because of its history, and I was wondering if you could explain more.
Yeah, there was a guy called Irenaeus of Leon, another Irenaeus, who decided what the form of the Bible would be, or the New Testament, and he was the guy who basically chose Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John from all the Gospels, and there were loads of Gospels at the time, at least 30, maybe twice as many. Gospel of Mary Magdalene, for example, Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas has a line where when Christ walks, he doesn't leave any footprints, right? Now, so for example, this was quite a contentious thing when the early Gnostic, well, it's kind of pre-Gnostic, when the early church or churches were setting up all around the Mediterranean. They all kind of they believed quite a wide variety of things, and later you got the orthodox idea of what you're meant to believe, i.e., I believe in God the Father, I believe in the communion of saints, I believe in the resurrection of the flesh, and if you don't believe in those things, you go to hell for eternity. Now, just to take one of those examples, for example, the resurrection in the flesh, the opposite, or the other alternative to that is the resurrection in spirit, right? So if you look in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, for example, Jesus, after he's died, he visits her in a vision, and he says something along the lines of, "Don't accept any laws from the lawmakers." Now, if you imagine trying to hold the Roman Empire together as there were various different groups who didn't take their authority from the bishop, but they actually called the bishop a dry canal, and they took their authority from invisible people who were appearing in visions and dreams, and also, they were kind of making prophecy and all these kind of things. It's really not conducive to an empire, right? Empires need to be administered with a firm hand. And so the Apostles' Creed was a very good way of, let's say, making heretical certain things like that, taking authority away from people and their own experiences of spirituality. Like, for example, the Gnostics said that what makes a church is the Holy Spirit, whereas what became Orthodoxy said, no, what makes a church is a bishop. And that's quite a different idea, right? And they said the Holy Spirit is invisible, but it's instantly recognizable, So if you look at Paul's letters, he kind of touches on these kind of things. He says, some of you may have a teaching, some of you may have a bunch of ideas, but listen, what I'm saying is what Jesus Christ said. And if you're not down with that, then you're wrong.
And so, for your own history, what got you studying the hints of drugs in the Bible? What was your first looks where it's like, oh, there might be something here I need to look at?
I got totally obsessed by the book to begin with. From another direction, I gave a talk at an anarchist conference about mistranslation in the Bible. That was one of the first talks I gave on the Bible, mistranslation in the service of empire. And so I looked into, I was looking at this line from Matthew: at the end of the world, there'll be wailing and all kinds of bad things happen. I looked at the word in Greek, and the word for world is not world, it's Aeon, which means the same as it does in English, Aeon, an epoch. So at the end of the epoch, there would be all kinds of horrible things happening, which is exactly what the Puritans in England wanted at the time when that Bible was put together. So King James comes along and says, no, let's make this Bible something which is not contentious, something which isn't going to cause any problems in this rather revolutionary moment we're having in English history. So I got into the Bible through mistranslation, and I continue to find that fascinating. Just to give you one example, a lot of people talk about Adam's rib. I think there was recently an American politician who came out with this with this thing about Adam's rib, and I can't remember what kind of misogynistic purpose he used it for. Now that word for rib is elsewhere in the Bible is translated as side, not rib. In fact, the only time it's ever translated as rib is in that particular line. So the original line would be Yahweh Elohim divided the man in half and then sealed up the wound. He didn't take out his rib. You see what I mean? So So to answer your question about the drugs, how did I get into that? I think I just ate some frankincense. I've got a feeling that was my it was just an inkling to eat some frankincense. Yeah.
That's great. And that'd be a great one to start on because it's so widely known. It's one of the most widely known drugs in the Bible, but a lot of people don't know it's psychoactive. So can you tell us about frankincense and what it's like when you share it with people?
Frankincense, just on your teeth, it's kind of gummy. It makes a gum if you get some like high grade frankincense, and you'll chew it up. That stuff has been carried from Oman to Palestine for many thousands of years. Before it was burned to Yahweh, it was burned to Baal, the Canaanite god. And before it was burned to him, it was burned to Ra, the Egyptian god. And there's been this a trade, and that journey takes 6 months, and it's 1,500 miles, and it's through robber-infested deserts. It's a real effort to get frankincense all the way from where it grows to where it's burned. And what's it got in it? It's got a bunch of stuff in it, and like for example, it's got dihydroabiatic acid, which is a GABA receptor agonist. So GABA receptors are the most common receptors in your brain. 40% of your neurons have GABA receptors on them, and they're inhibitory. That means that if you take a GABA receptor agonist like frankincense or like Valium, then it makes that particular nerve less likely to fire. So it dampens down the whole system. But it's got other stuff in it as well. It's got insensol acetate, which affects the TRPV3 ion channel, which is quite an interesting one because in the brain, this ion channel is found in the skin, where it's involved in temperature sensation. It's also found widely distributed in the brain, but we don't know what it does in the brain. So it's a mystery, that one. Yeah, so frankincense also contains pinene, alpha and beta pinene, camphene, sabinine, myrcene, which is related to MDMA, limonene, and linalool as well. Limonene's a really interesting one. It's what makes lemons smell like lemons. And there was an experiment done in a hospital with depressed people, and basically what they did was to have a lemon fragrance, a lemon vaporizer in the room the whole time. So after I think it was 2 weeks, this experiment, people were basically inhaling vapors of lemons, and of the 12 depressed people, 9 of them had come off their medication and their scores had got back to normal on their depression scores. Now the reason I think that is interesting, and these these kind of minor, what might be considered not necessarily psychedelic in itself, but so for example, the tranquilizer aspect of frankincense. There's a really interesting experiment where people were tested for creative thinking or creative problem solving, and they were divided into 2 cohorts, 2 groups, and both of them had to do this test. But before they did the test, they had to solve a maze, and they had to solve the same maze, but there was a slight difference in that one of the mazes was illustrated with a mouse trying to get a piece of cheese going through the maze, and the other one was illustrated by a mouse trying to get away from a nasty looking bird of prey. And then so people sat the mazes and they went and did some problem solving. Now the group which was seeking the cheese did twice as well as the group that were looking at the maze, which was, had the unhappy looking mouse in it. So I think that's quite significant because frankincense and myrrh and these chemicals that are in the Bible and that we're going to talk about were used in divination, basically. The main function of them, certainly in the tabernacle, was divination. So the high priest would be anointed with a bunch of oils, and then he would sit in a kind of a hot box smoke chamber in clouds of smoke, and he would talk to the angels. He'd see visions of the angels, and then he would take whatever answers that he learned back out to the tribe, and then to guide the tribe, which is very much how shamanism works in the Amazon. The shaman goes off on his own or her own and comes back with information on what maybe he's diagnosing a disease, or maybe it's military divination. When should we attack, or when the enemy going to attack us? Finding your way to game or to resources, that kind of thing. So if you think of divination as problem solving, kind of very elaborate ritual of problem solving, then it makes sense that's something that will reduce your anxiety and increase your powers of problem solving. It kind of makes sense that you have a bunch of tranquilizers in there. However, having said all that, it's quite important that we don't get too lost in words like tranquilizers and anxiolytics and so on and so forth, because those chemicals do all kinds of things, especially in combination. They do some wonderful things in combination.
Hey folks, it's sponsor time. The company is CV Sciences, the product is Plus CBD, and the discount code for 20% off is Lex Files. And remember, the top 3 reasons to use that code on pluscbdoil.com. Number 1, I would give Plus CBD to your grandmother, because I gave it to my grandmother. Number 2, I was the biggest skeptic. Then I started studying the endocannabinoid system. Number 3, I know firsthand that CV Sciences is committed to pure science and to enhancing well-being. So when you find yourself in need of CBD from true agricultural hemp, consider Plus CBD, the number 1 CBD brand in the United States. That coupon code is LexFiles, and the place to use it is pluscbdoil.com. And that's one of the interesting things about the ancient world, is how many plants would get thrown into one brew. And you have all these debates about which plants are being used. Some people are saying it's cannabis, some other DMT containing materials. What do you think are the most common drugs that were being used in like the Old Testament period of the Bible?
Well, I guess what we would recognize today as a drug would be cannabis. I think Chris Bennett has sewn up that particular line of inquiry. It seems at this point, looking at the evidence from the Bible, looking at the evidence from linguistics and the archaeological evidence, which is, has found cannabis both in Palestine and in every single territory around it. There's almost no doubt that Caneh Bossum in the Bible is cannabis. The way it was used is interesting, because the pipe hadn't been introduced to that part of the world yet. And the way that, for example, Herodotus, he visits the Scythians in about 500 BC, and he reports that they fold down the flaps of their tents, and then they throw cannabis on the fire. And then here's the quote: "Immediately it smokes and gives out such a vapor as no Grecian vapor bath can exceed. The Scyths delighted shout for joy." Right? So that's how they threw a party. They did it at funerals as well. The Scythians. So this idea of fumigation inside enclosed spaces, you see that in various different tribes. You see it you see something similar happening in China. You see it with the oracle at Delphi as well, who was prophesizing from in the cave, again in enclosed space, and she was burning all sorts, including myrrh, which contains opioid receptor agonist. And so you get this in the tabernacle as well. The tabernacle is a piece of kit described over 5 chapters in the Bible, and what you end up with is a very, very well sealed smoke chamber at the back of it, and a thick veil to keep the smoke in as well. And the only thing that happens in there is handfuls of finely ground psychoactive resins are burnt in a censer, and the high priest talks to angels. In terms of other drugs, myrrh, which is still used as a mood enhancer today, a social lubricant. There's tribes in Africa which still take myrrh at parties. The Romans used to have myrrh-infused wine. Something quite interesting about the way the Romans did it is that you can imagine how sumptuous and how lavish a Roman feast would be, but you only got 1 glass of myrrh wine, because myrrh is soporific, it's hypnotic. If you drink too much of it, you go to sleep. So they knew about not overdoing the dose there. So myrrh, obviously it's there. It's one of the gifts that's given to the baby Jesus. It's offered to Christ on the cross when he's being executed. He's offered myrrh in wine, probably because it's a painkiller, and in fact it contains one of the opioid receptor agonists it contains has a tenth the painkilling power of morphine. What else? Frankincense. You've got a load actually. There's one called Costus, which I'm getting into recently, Sacerea Costus. It's used in Gnostics. It's kind of smoked in Tibet. It's used in Ayurvedic medicine as well. Or you can get drops of it. And the Islamic culture, they say that if you put this stuff up your nose, it will make you sneeze out your jinn, as in it makes you sneeze out your bad spirits. So I've experimented with that. It hasn't made me sneeze yet, but it has made me feel really good because it's got all kinds of nice chemicals in it. Costus, get that one off the internet.
Do you have any other favorites you would recommend that are the so-called in the legal entheogen realm?
Yeah, I mean, I like myrrh. Myrrh is delicious. The combination of myrrh and cannabis is something quite extraordinary. Just a few crystals. People will look at you funny at parties. But if you chug away on that for a little bit, it's really, really quite pleasant.
To switch back to something a little bit more personal, because there's a medicinal side to all of these as well, which I think is really fascinating, how it can be spiritual and medicinal and recreational intoxicant. And so I wanted to hear more about you going to South America and picking up that terrible parasite and how you used Aya and folk medicine to fight against it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. I hadn't been in Brazil very long. I'd only been there a few months, and I went to cut some jagubi, to cut some ayahuasca vine, and I got bitten by a sandfly, and I got bitten just underneath the nipple on my left-hand side. And that the bite kind of swelled into a pimple, and the pimple kept growing and became a problematic, pussy ulcer. And people looked very gravely at it, and they said, "This is ferida brava," which means an angry ulcer. That's how you translate it. Or leishmaniosa, which is in Portuguese, which is a beautiful word, I think, leishmaniosa. In English, leishmaniasis. And they said, the people around me said I needed to go and take injections of antimonium tartrate. And I'd studied this kind of thing. My degree was in the history and philosophy of science, technology, and medicine, and I kind of specialised in history and kind of real politics around medicine. And this is kind of going back, I stopped taking pharmaceuticals when I was a teenager, and was still quite militant about that. So I didn't believe the hype, and I knew that these people had been treating this same disease, just decades before with local medicines. In fact, it's always struck me about, I remember when I was very young, my mum, I got stung by a stinging nettle, and she pointed to a dock leaf, which was just next to the stinging nettle. I don't know if you got that in where you're from. Mm-hmm. But I always found that amazing, that there's something that stings you and there's the medicine right next to it. And you see that, if you look, you see that in many places in the natural world, and not just in space, actually in time as well. Certain things will flower at the time when the flower is useful for treating a certain disease, for example. So in terms of time and in space, your medicine is often right next to the disease. So I didn't believe that I needed to have injections of heavy metals into my body. And I've been drinking ayahuasca or Daime, I should say, for about 6 years at that point. So I already had plenty of examples, plenty of proofs, let's say, of spectacular things happening, things that I'd wished for popping into my hands, or visions that had been turned out to be really magical. So it was quite interesting, because I'd gone to Brazil with two very specific jobs, let's say. One of them was to learn more about how powerful Daime was, and the other one was to finish writing my book, my first book, which was about, among other things, medicine and the politics around it, and also about autonomy over your own body, and a bunch of stuff like that. So what happened? So I had this growing ulcer, and people started to get really scared. They said, "You've got to have injections, because this particular disease it can't be cured with natural medicines. And the second stage of it attacks the cartilage in your nose and your ears and your throat and your stomach and everywhere you've got cartilage, basically. And they, I remember this guy saying to me, listen, I'll put you in my car, we can drive around town, and I'll point out the people who haven't got noses because they had this disease and they didn't have any antimonial tartrate to treat it. Now, I didn't believe this. I thought it was untrue from my academic background. And also, like I say, I already had plenty of proof that Daime was magical. And here I was being given an opportunity to do the two things which I'd actually gone to Brazil to do. First one was to learn about the power of Daime, and I had a very, very good opportunity because I had a serious disease. And the second one, which was to finish my book. Now, as I said, the book was about medicine, among other things, and it was so pertinent, and it was the kind of perfect answer to the question. It made my book into an autobiography rather than just the stories of stuff that I'd learned. And I thought that was an opportunity that was too good to turn up or turn down. So yeah, what did I do? I drank loads and loads of Daime. I did it in ritual. I went to see a curandero who. So this, in the lineage that I'm from, Daime. Again, I mentioned that guy, Mestre Ireneo. His own curandero was called Padrino Wilson, and Wilson's son lived quite near where I lived in the jungle. So I went to go and see him, and he said, no, I can't treat this. And this is a very serious disease. It can go away, it can come back again, and it can, destroy the cartilage in your nose. And I was quite cross because that's what everyone had told me, and I expressed this to him, and I kind of challenged the guy really along the lines of, well, I hear your father was a great curandero. What about you? So he agreed to treat me, and that involved drinking Daime every day at 4 o'clock in the morning with a few prayers, and then either going back to sleep or meditating or going for a walk or doing whatever I wanted at that point. I was celibate for the whole period, which was about 8 months. And there was quite a few kind of dietary instructions as well, because you want to keep the, as it was explained to me and as I understand it, you want to keep the infection on the skin and not let it get through your blood, let's say. I'm not sure how nuanced that explanation is, but so I had this ulcer, kind of pus flowing ulcer that was growing on my chest, and what it would do is it would form a scab, and then underneath the scab this pus would grow until it was until it was about to burst, and then I would put a mud pack on it, and I put like certain herbs into the mud pack, including ayahuasca. Actually, I put the mud into the mud pack, and then I'd sleep on it, and then in the morning that would peel off, and then I'd have a nice open, like foul smelling wound on my chest. And I kind of went through that cycle over and over again, watching it get bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller according to all kinds of things that were going on in my life. And it was terrifying, actually. It was horrible. I'd wake up in the morning and the first thing I had to do was clean this thing, and I had to clean it with different, like the bark of a cashew tree and the bark of a mango tree, and I was doing it in a ritualized way. So when I was cutting the barks, for example, I would be making up poems to the tree, which is something I do even now. If you ever pick some wild medicine, then make some, offer it something, offer it at the very least thank you, and if you can, some kind of piece of art. I think that's a good way to work with the spirits, wherever you might find them. So yeah, I did that. So I was drinking that every day for about 4 or 5 months of it, doing a load of ceremonies. I lost 10 kilos. I lost I'd already. So the Japanese woman I mentioned before, who took me along to Daime, we split up. We married, and then we split up in Japan, and then I left Japan, and I kind of made my way towards Brazil. And then she decided she wanted to get back with me, and I thought this was my dream come true. And then she came over just as I got ill, and so anyway, I lost 10 kilos. I lost an ex-wife as well. I lost all kinds of things that I didn't need in my life, and lost a pair of rose-tinted spectacles about what the world looks like. I think I see it a little bit, maybe a little bit more cynically, a little bit more magically, and a little bit clearer now. Very formative experience.
Wow. And gutsy to trust to the plants like that. And one line I really liked from your book was how all things do seem to work pretty magically. And the nurse that you met that helped you through this 1 year, 1 month, and 1 day after meeting this nurse, something special happened?
Oh yeah, baby. Oh yeah, 2 babies. Yeah,
Two
that was an interesting
babies.
one. Yeah. Yeah, the whole thing was totally magical. Like, so I met her the first day of January, and I was the way, even the way I met her was interesting. I had some tarot cards, and I was just playing with my tarot cards, and this woman came over. And I'd already spotted, actually, this woman was. I'd spotted that she was kind of looking at me, and I was like I say, I was celibate at the time. I was also extremely paranoid because where I lived was quite a bad place. It was it's kind of ayahuasca gangster central, let's say. It's a little bit better now, but when I was there, it was really, really bad, terrible, in fact. And the people around me had anyway, for a number of reasons, I really was in quite a bad situation and quite paranoid. And I thought that this woman was a crackhead, and I thought that she was trying to rob me. So I was very wary of her, as I was wary of everyone at that time. And she came over and drew a tarot card, and it was the Lover's card. And I very quickly disabused her of any romantic notions. I said, well, this one's, it's often called the brothers, it's often called the twins. And I talked about the mysticism around it, which as a way of kind of, because I knew she fancied me, but I was just not interested at all. And then what happened was she kind of followed me around for a little while. She proved to be once I trusted her, I discovered what a wonderful person she was. And yeah, she looked after me. She nursed me for about 4 months. I used to wake up in the morning to her singing Kura songs, like songs of cure. And she was and still is very dedicated to that tradition and that medicine and that particular way of working. But then we went off to I'd overstayed my visa by this point by quite a lot, and I got kicked. Basically had to leave the country in a hurry and went through to Bolivia, and we went together. And in Bolivia, I bought her a tarot deck, and one of the cards was printed wrong. All of them were printed right, except for one of the cards. It was double printed, and it turned out to be the Lover's card. So I thought it was quite interesting. And then we ended up having twins, and as I just said, that card is also called the Twins. That's one of its kind of titles as well. That, and both my twins were born with birthmarks in the position where I had my wound beneath my left nipple. And I'll tell you something else which I thought was quite interesting. There was when they'd grown a little bit, I went back to Brazil and showed them, showed them off to the curandero who'd fixed me when I was sick. And he said, "Oh, it left a tag, did it?" And I was expecting him to be, clapping his hands and sending off fireworks at this profound piece of magic that had happened. And he was, he barely raised an eyebrow, because the way that that culture, and actually many cultures that aren't quite so, let's say, materialistic and let's say free of poetry as this particular rotting culture that you and I inhabit are, that was something that was completely normal. The idea of a tag being left from one generation to the next is, it didn't even raise an eyebrow from him.
All these stories just turned into some great books that I wanted to touch on. So you, of your trilogy, the first part is Science Revealed, and then in front of me I have Neuro-Apocalypse, which has a lot about drugs in the Bible. And then to come is Apocalypses, Past, Present, and Personal.
Yeah, so I don't know when that's going to come. Life has got really busy recently. The first one, Science Revealed. Yeah, twins. Yeah, exactly. I've actually got another baby now. I've got a 1-year-old. Born on Christmas Day.
Tov.
Thanks. So he's not him. So the first book, Science Revealed, it's out of print at the moment. It's going to be re-released hopefully in the next few months. We sold out. That one is about revelation in science. I'm looking at scientists who've discovered things in dreams or in flashes of insight. People like Tesla, for example, who had a vision of the alternating current motor as he was walking in Budapest Park. Man who never made a blueprint, never made a calculation, but took about 500 patents from things that he'd seen floating in the air in front of him. Calvin's another one, interesting one, who was sitting in his car waiting for his wife, and in about 20 seconds he had a flash of inspiration about the Calvin cycle, which is the series of substrates that a plant uses in order to absorb in order to do photosynthesis, basically, in order to to use the energy of the sun, of light. So I was looking at, so part of that first book is about stuff that's been discovered in dreams and flashes of inspiration, and also how the academy then deals with that. So I'm looking at the realpolitik in journals, and how funding is allocated and what's behind that. I've also, that's something I'm coming quite close to my heart, is neo-colonialism in the academy, and generally all kinds of awfulness in the academy. So if you look online for a talk called Neo-colonialism in the study of ayahuasca, in the academic study of ayahuasca, you'll find me talking about about some of the things which are impediments to us learning stuff from indigenous people, because it seems that we're not very interested in studying what the indigenous people have to say about their own medicines. It often seems that we kind of give a nod to the indigenous people the same way you might kind of clap at a child's finger painting and say, oh, isn't that quaint, isn't that a nice thing? But actually to believe they have some real wisdom which says more about ayahuasca than receptors, for example, is the academy's not really there yet, in my opinion. Well, that's my first book, Science Revealed. Then they were released as a trilogy, or the first two parts of a trilogy. They don't actually need to be read in order. And in fact, when the one you mentioned, Neuro-Apocalypse, which was originally book 2, it's when it gets re-released. In fact, no, that one's already been re-released. It's a standalone book. So the second one is about revelation inside your own head. So I'm looking at how, for example, how different languages limit what we see. So I do this comparison between the English language and the Japanese language, and psychology of perception in those two countries. What's been measured about. I'll give you an example. If you show a fish tank, like an animation of a fish tank, to a Japanese person and an American person, the American person is likely to say there was a big fish, and then tell you about what the big fish was doing. And the Japanese person is much more likely to say it was an aquarium, and then start to describe the background details and relative details, i.e. one fish was bigger than another. And then if you then take one of the fish from the animation, once the person's looked at it, you give them a 5-minute break, and then you show them a fish, but you put it on a different background, right? Different background to what it was originally shown on. It doesn't make any difference to the American. The American will say, oh, yeah, that fish was in there or it wasn't in there. But the Japanese takes longer to answer that question and makes more mistakes. So it seems that something happens in the Japanese person's head, which means that the individual gets bound to the background. And you see that kind of filter out into all aspects of the culture. For example, when you're writing a haiku, it's got to have a reference to the season, for example. So it's got to be contextualized. If it's not contextualized, it's not a haiku. It's just a bunch of syllables. You also see it in Japanese art. There's no tradition of still life in Japan because stuff doesn't make sense in isolation. It's got to be contextualized again. So you'll often see in those charcoal pictures, for example, a small temple or something like that with all this kind of swirling waterfalls and clouds around it, because the individual, the connection between the individual and the context is they do it differently in Japan, and I think it's partly to do with the linguistics, partly to do with the geography as well of the country, because you can't really be an individual in a city or in a country where you keep on having tsunamis and earthquakes, and they have to get together and rebuild their lives every couple of generations. That's part of it, is looking at how linguistics influence what we think, also how drugs influence what we think, fear as well, all the different things that's going on inside your head, and how it feeds into our perception and also our capacity. So another area I'm looking at is autism. People who have heightened skills with autism, which is actually quite a lot. Like 1 in 10 autists has some kind of area of excellence, and that's only the ones that are discovered. And it can be anything from like balancing to, there was a guy called J-Mac. It's a really interesting video of this guy who was an autistic kid who was obsessed with basketball, and he was the basketball team's mascot. He used to go and take people's towels and stuff and glasses of water. And on the last day of high school, on the last match, they let this guy play in the last couple of minutes, and he ended up shooting like 3-pointers from all over the from all over the court, and he describes how how the basketball basket was like a huge bucket, because autists, the way that autistic people, their visual cortices are different. They've got much more neurons, much more connections in the visual cortex. So when you see, in Rain Man, for example, where all those toothpicks get spilt, and Dustin Hoffman says what number it is, it seems that the visual cortex in autistic people is a lot more acute, so they can see things a lot clearer in some ways. So yeah. Goes into drugs for a bit, goes into anarchy, goes into the construction of the Bible. The new book, I don't know. I mean, what I'm looking at there is, again, it's about the apocalypse. It's my fundamental obsession since I was a teenager, was the apocalypse, and by which I mean all of it, including the lifting of the veil, which is what apocalypse means, the lifting of a veil, when something which is hidden is not hidden anymore and you can see it. So the word discover is a cognate of the word apocalypse. So the new book, if it ever happens, is looking at what happens when an individual's apocalypse, an individual's realization, opens up a new space across the community. So, for example, when Galileo decided to turn a nautical instrument of the telescope up towards the sky and revealed the moon of Jupiter, he let's say he revealed something that had been hidden before. So that's another sense, it's an apocalypse. Again, the discovery of the new world would be another one, where you suddenly this new patch of land gets discovered and all these interesting things start coming back for it, including coffee, for example. You get coffee coming back from the new world, and that was one of the first stimulants that arrived in Europe. And then you get all this kind of revolutionary plotting in coffee houses in France and things like that. Yeah, I hope it gets written one day.
Yeah, me too. It sounds very exciting. And by the way, for everybody listening, we'll have links to the Reverend's work, and especially to the videos that you have on Vimeo. You have all kinds of great lectures on there and all of the aspects of the things you study. So those are especially intriguing to check out.
Thank you.
And so the one last question I wanted to ask before I let you go, because I think it kind of ties together. Can you talk about the phrase in the Bible or in the prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread," and the linguistics behind that? I thought it was the most interesting things in the book.
Thank you. So give us this day our daily bread is a whole lot of day, isn't it, when you come to think of it? Now, this is probably the most well-known piece of scripture of the entire New Testament. That line is probably being said somewhere by somebody at any given moment in the world. And it's from the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. The word daily there is epiouson, and that word doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible. It doesn't appear anywhere else in Greek literature, in fact. Geronimo, who has translated the Bible, he translated it as super substantiatum, which means that which is beyond normal being, or something like that. Epiouson. Epi is the epi of epitaph or epilogue. It's the end. It's the beyond bit, and ouson seems to have something to do with the word be. So it's that which goes beyond normal stuff. So it's exactly the opposite of daily. Let's say it's that which is not normally found in your daily life. So give us this day our daily bread. So a lot of people see it as manna, the manna that was in the wilderness that the Israelites ate, which is also quite an interesting stuff, because not only people know this, because we don't really read the Bible very much, but there were two things given to the Israelites in the wilderness, and one was quails, like quail meat. They had as much quail meat as they wanted, basically. But we don't really hear about that. We hear about the manna, and if you read the book, you'll get all the reasoning. In fact, even if you don't read the book, you go and check out one of my talks. I think that manna is ergot. The way manna is processed in the Bible is it's ground up and then it's boiled and then it's baked, which is what Albert Hoffman said is how you would get a powerful psychedelic out of ergot. And he said this was open to early man. But yeah, back to the Lord's Prayer. People, it's such a curious word. It's like I say, it is not found anywhere else in the entire Greek language.
Wow. And it might be Give Us This Day, our daily ergot LSD precursor.
Yeah, exactly. And that, thy will be done. Quite interesting you bring up that particular prayer in Daime. This guy, Mistranslation, who I mentioned before, he altered one of the lines there. So in English, it normally says, "Thy kingdom come." And in Portuguese, that's "Venha nós a vossa reina," which is how most Catholics say it in Portugal or in Brazil. In my lineage, in Daime, it was being changed to "Vamos nós a vossa reina," which means "Let's go to your kingdom," right? Which puts the onus on you as the initiate or as the person drinking that drink to do the work in order to take yourself towards the divine kingdom rather than waiting around for the divine kingdom to arrive with you. And I think that's quite good advice for anyone working with psychedelics, or even not with psychedelics. Anyone working with kind of spiritual technologies, is that we need to make efforts in order to attain to the heights, to get our concentration up, and not spend too much time focusing on mundane things.
Well, thank you so much for sharing on this today, and we'll put all the links there so people can learn more about your work. Thank you for all your study and sharing it with us.
Great, Lex. Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
All right, and good luck with those kids, and good luck getting that next book written when it comes.
Cool. Well, all the best to you, and also to Lorenzo as well.
All right, thanks.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. To listen to other episodes, find us at pluscbdoil.com/Lex Files. If you have any questions, compliments, or suggestions, feel free to write me at research@cvsciences.com. If you enjoyed the program, please rate us on iTunes and share a link to your social media. It means a lot to us. The Lex Files is produced by Matt Payne. Our chief advisor is Amabel Dela Cruz. The music is by Jake Bradford Sharp. Our sponsor is CV Sciences, maker of America's favorite CBD oil. And remember the coupon code LEXFILES. I'm Lex Pelger, signing off.